Welcome to Good Grief, the podcast dedicated to demystifying and destigmatizing grief with compassion and humor. I'm Nikki. I'm an end-of-life doula and a grief coach in Columbus, Ohio. Thank you so much for tuning in today. Today we have a very interesting topic. I would hope all my topics are interesting, but today we're going to talk about how to talk to children about grief, and specifically death grief or death-related grief, but grief in general. Now, full disclaimer before we start, I do not have children of my own. I've mentioned that before, but I'm going to mention that yet again. I do not have children of my own. I do not work with children typically. I am familiar with children. I know they exist. No, I've obviously been around children and I have talked to them, but I don't work with them on a regular basis and I don't have any in my home. So all the information I'm giving you today is just based on research and not really anything anecdotal from myself personally. But if you have a story about a child and in relation with grief that you'd like to share with me, I'd love to hear about it. But let's just dive in. So, first of all, before we dive into what to say and how to respond to some of their questions, some things we need to know about children. I know there seems to be two different mindsets I've noticed in speaking with children. We either want to try to treat them like adults, or we want to talk to them like their feelings and their thoughts aren't really all that important because they're children. And both of those are going to be incorrect, right? Children are children. They're not adults. Their, prefrontal cortex is not developed yet. I mean, teenagers' prefrontal cortexes are not developed yet. And I will probably do another episode on talking to teenagers and younger adults. But this is specifically for children. Children, we're talking like up to age 5. I mean, this episode, we're going to talk up to a little bit older, but when their age is like 3 to 5 or so, they're in a weird, like self-centered type of existence with the way they connect with the world around them. They see themselves as the center of most things that they experience. And that's not abnormal. I mean, that's not a bad thing. That's just how children view the world. If your child maybe sees you really angry about something, they're going to think it's their fault somehow, or that they caused you to be angry, even if you're angry at, your spouse or the neighbor down the street or whatever. They also tend to have very little contact with like systems outside of the family. They probably have some friends, maybe you take them to daycare, things like that. But overall, they don't have a ton of contact with the world as a whole. And most of what they know and respond to is immediate family information, if that makes sense. So in terms of how children around this age are feeling, a couple things to remember. Children tend to experience anxiety when separated from their primary caregivers, be it their parents or whomever. They're also highly distressed by extreme powerful emotions coming from adults because they haven't really experienced those yet in adult forms. Yes, they have tantrums, they get angry, they get frustrated, but not in the same way that adults do. So when adults are feeling these emotions, it distresses them. It's frightening. They tend to be scared, and again, they feel slightly responsible for it. There's a lot of typical questions children will ask in relation to death and dying and loss. And there's a lot of great and healthy ways to respond to them, and there's some unhealthy and not good ways to respond to them. But overall, like you would to any person who is grieving, an adult, making sure they understand that their feelings are valid and they're normal and that they're okay. And in whatever they're feeling, whatever they're thinking is natural and normal. Don't minimize their feelings and don't brush off their emotions just because they're children. Children's emotions are important to them. We might see them differently because we're adults and think, they don't understand the world. They don't know what's going on. But to them, what they're feeling is their entire world because that's all they know right now. So brushing off their feelings, like saying you shouldn't have to, don't worry about things like this, or don't be silly, don't worry, blah, blah, blah. That's not exactly the healthiest way to respond to them, because you're invalidating their feelings and you're just confusing them more. And they're going to feel like they're going to feel like they're wrong or bad for having those feelings, right? So some typical questions children will ask and how to respond to them, right? If it's a case of one of their parents passing, not even necessarily, but let's just say, for example, one of the parents has passed away, and the child will worry, well, who will take care of me if the other parent passes away? Or even when they're just starting to grasp the concept of death, if it's a grandparent, a friend, a neighbor, and they think, well, wait a minute, what's this death thing? If mom and dad die, who's going to take care of me? What's going to happen? Because again, and it's not necessarily mom and dad, caregiver, you should use that term instead, but they might ask these questions, and you can't just say, oh, don't worry, mom and dad will never die. I'm just going to say mom and dad. Please read that as caretaker. Oh no, don't worry, we'll never die. We'll always be here to take care of you. You can't say that, because it's not true, and you're not being truthful to the child. But you could say things like, I intend to be here with you until you're grown up and you have kids of your own and are prepared to live without me. Or I will keep you safe, and I will keep you safe, and I will take care of you as long as I possibly can. Just reassure them that you're not leaving today. You're not going to die tomorrow, although we all know you could die anytime. But just reassure them that you will do everything in your power to take care of them as long as you possibly can, right? Without necessarily saying, I will never die, because it's lying to the child. If they might ask, well, who's going to die next? If so-and-so is dead, anybody could die. Who's going to die? Who else can die? Well, again, you could say, oh, don't worry about that. Nobody else is going to die, because somebody will, and we don't know that. The factual answer would be like, any of us could die at any moment. And the child probably knows that already, but we don't necessarily need to tell them that. We don't want to scare them, because, then they're going to go into, oh God, what if mom and dad die? Who's going to take care of me, et cetera, et cetera. Take this opportunity to really try to explain to them what death means, if they don't already understand it, right? And that every living thing in the world will eventually die when it's their time, when it's time for that thing to die. Plants are going to die, pets are going to die, things are going to pass, but they're not all going to die tomorrow. They're not all going to die at once. When it's somebody or something's time, that's when they will go, which tends to lead into the, if mom and dad die, then who will take care of me? Okay. I think the most difficult question to answer, not just to a child, but to anybody. Why? Why did they die? Why did this person die? Why did this happen to me? Why? Right? And I could think of a million different ways you would feel compelled to answer a child, like, that's just how it is, or it's God's will. Just because things die. But show them that you have feelings too, and that you question this too, because we all do. Like I just said, even adults will ask why. Why did this person die? Why did this have to happen? Get down to their level and say, that's a really good question. I wonder that myself sometimes. We don't know the answer. Nobody knows for sure why people are born and people die, or all beings are born and die. It's the cycle of life. If you have inherent cultural or spiritual beliefs, you can share those with your child, but just ensure them that, although we may not know why we die, what we can say for sure is that when someone dies, it hurts and it's sad, and that's okay, right? Okay. So back to that, children are selfish in a way. I hate using the word selfish. It feels like a not good word, but you know what I mean. The child might ask, is this my fault? And of course, our immediate response is like, oh, no, of course it's not your fault. Don't be silly. Again, never say don't be silly. You're undermining their feelings, right? And you're invalidating their response. So, obviously, no, it's not your fault, but you don't want to brush it off. No, it's not your fault. Don't be silly. You could say things like, well, it might feel like it's your fault. And you might also be thinking to yourself, well, if I hadn't been a bad girl, or if I hadn't stayed out in the yard when mom yelled for me, an extra 3 times, maybe she wouldn't have died. Like, you might be wondering those things. It sounds like you would like to do things differently if you could, right? I kind of feel like we all feel that way. And it's hard to see children in pain and to take all that pain onto themselves and take blame for it, right? But just reassuring them that it's not their fault, but that it's valid that they're feeling that way, that it's okay that they're not necessarily okay if they're blaming themselves, but it's normal that they feel like it could be their fault. But it's not. It's again, we can go back to, prior to that, everything will die eventually. So it's nobody's fault. It's just happened. So I don't know if this is necessarily a question a child would ask, but they might have a response to, if a parent has passed. People might say to the child, I don't know if it'd be in a joking term, but, well, I guess you're the man of the house now. I guess you're the woman of the house now. First of all, please don't say that to children, because they're going to take it literally. And if it's an older child, it might be that they have younger siblings and they will have to help out more. But don't put that kind of pressure on them. Let the child still be a child. Let them still have their feelings. There are adults around. We don't necessarily need to make children, even adolescents or teens, into adults right away. They're not able to function as adults yet. So don't put that on them. So if they were to say, is it my responsibility? Am I really the mom of the house now? No, of course not. You're little Bobby, and you always will be. And you may have to help out Dad with some of the responsibilities of taking care of your little sister, but you're still Bobby, and you're still allowed to be little Bobby. You can go play with your friends and ride your bike and do whatever it is they do. Okay. So these questions are obviously, they're hard. And like I said earlier, it's really hard to watch children suffering and dealing with these, what we consider adult emotions or adult problems, right? And we can't always answer all these questions for children. What we can do as adults is create a safe space for the child to ask their questions and explore their own answers to these same questions. Like a therapist will turn questions back around on their client sometimes, like, why am I feeling this way all the time? Well, why do you think you're feeling this way? We don't have to necessarily therapeutize our children, but let them explore their feelings a little bit. You're feeling like this is your fault. I can assure you it's not, but what makes you think it's your fault? Let them realize on their own that, okay, it's not. It's not my fault. This has happened. But outside of them asking questions, give them space to ask the questions. Set aside a time to really talk to these children. Like, you just suffered a tremendous loss. You don't have to phrase it that way. But you can say your mom, your dad, your grandmother, your aunt, your friend, whoever just passed away. They just died. Do you have questions about it? Do you want to talk about how you're feeling? You're probably feeling a lot of hurtful things, and let's talk about it right now. Obviously, if it gets to a point where other issues start to come in, if there's behavioral issues, or they're not working through their grief, you may need to bring in a therapist. That's not a bad thing. And if you're not prepared to answer these questions for your child, or for a child that is in your life, that they ask you these questions, if you're not prepared to answer those, don't make something up. Seek out some help. Talk to either a counselor, a therapist, or a grief coach like me, and we can help guide you through that process of how to talk to them and how to answer these questions, or answer them, to the child for you if you're not comfortable with it just yet, or if you're experiencing too much of your own emotions that you can't answer these questions. That's why people like us exist, so that we can help navigate these waters for you, especially if it's new to you too. If you've never lost somebody super close to you, and now you've lost your spouse and you have 2 children, or you have your spouse but you have 2 children and your mother just died, and you've never experienced a loss that close before. It might be new to you too, and you're going through enough, and you're going through your own grief, and then you have children that are asking you these questions. It could be very difficult for you to have to deal with both at the same time. So do not ever be afraid to reach out for help. I'll say that 1,001 times. Never be afraid to ask for help. It's not weak. Asking for help is a sign of strength. It's showing that you recognize that you cannot get through this on your own, and nobody should have to. Okay, so outside of questions that children might ask, some things you can just say, or some ways you can address the child up front as far as it comes to death. Like, let's say they don't know yet that their grandmother has passed away, right? And you need to explain to them that somebody is not there and that they are dead. First of all, don't be afraid to use real and factual information with your child. Don't be afraid to explain to them if it was, cancer. Explain to them what cancer is. Don't just say, well, grandma got sick and was sick for a long time and she died. Because then, what's going to happen if you get the flu or your child gets the flu? I'm sick. Oh God, that means I'm going to die, right? It seems silly to us, but not to a child. They need to understand that just being sick doesn't automatically mean you're going to die. So don't be afraid to use a little bit more information to explain to them, or let them ask questions. Give them the space to ask you questions about what that means that they're dead and why they, what caused them to die. It might be helpful to recall back to if they've experienced another loss, like if they had a pet that died, you can kind of relate it to that in a way. You remember your cat Fluffy. When somebody dies, they don't come back. They're gone. And I would highly recommend letting your child take place in any rituals. If there's a ceremony, a funeral, a celebration of life, or a wake, or whatever your culture might practice, I would highly, highly recommend having your child be part of that, so it can help them understand and grasp exactly what's going on, but also appreciate your culture and whatever your spiritual beliefs are, so that they can become part of that as well. Leaving them out of that just adds more mystery. And when kids have blank spaces, they fill them in on their own, and we don't want that. So another important thing to remember is that, first of all, your child is grieving. They may not always act like it, but that's just it. Their grieving process is going to be very different than yours. Just like my grief process will be different than yours, and your best friend's grieving process. Everybody's grieving process is different, but a child's grieving process is going to be very different than yours or than an adult's. So just remember and recognize that. Also, give your child the ability or access to some kind of ongoing connection to the person who died. Or physical objects, like, this was a necklace that your grandmother really liked, or this was a photograph that your grandma had next to her bedside. Let them have that so they can continue to have that sense of connection to the person who died. Just because they're a child doesn't mean they don't need those connections like we do. A lot of us like to have a physical sentimental object of somebody who passed away. Like, I have a t-shirt, a button-up t-shirt that belonged to my brother. I don't wear it because he was much larger than me, but I still have it in my closet. I still look at it, and it's just one of those things I enjoy having around me. So don't be shy of giving your child something that they can be responsible for that links them to that person. There's tons of literature out there as far as books you can give kids that are geared toward children for them to read, to help them understand these things a little bit too. If you don't want to sit and explain it all, there's books for adults in explaining to their children. There's books for children to read to understand what death means and what grief means. Just throw a quick Google search in. But there is one book that I cannot recommend enough that is such a great read. I've read it like 2 or 3 times. It's by my patron saint, Caitlin Doughty, called Will My Cat Eat My Eyeballs? And it's basically, she just collected all these questions from children surrounding death and answered them in a responsible way, not basically blowing smoke up their ass. Like, this is what happens. And, she was asked that question once by a child, like, I heard that if I die in my house, my cat will eat me. Well, is that the case? And she decided to just write this book on all these random questions she's gotten over the years from people surrounding death. But read it first as an adult, and then decide if your child is old enough to understand and read and appreciate this book. I will. I don't have children, so I can't just say, oh, your kid's fine reading this. As a parent, that's up to you to decide what your child can and can't read. It's not up to me. But I do recommend that book. It was just a great read for me as an adult, and I think you'd really like it as well. It's a little entertaining, but very factual and very fascinating. So definitely check out Will My Cat Eat My Eyeballs? I'll link that in the show notes. So, well, gosh, I rambled on quite a bit. That's about it. That is, in a nutshell, talking with children. I didn't go into great detail, so please don't take every single word I said as gospel. Again, I said it at the beginning of the show, I'll say it at the end. I do not have children of my own, and I do not work with children on a regular basis. I have worked with children. I have been around children. I have been exposed to them. I have spoken to them. I've even spoken to them about death. Back when I was teaching Sunday school at my church, there was a very young little boy whose father died very suddenly and tragically. And he had such a beautiful support system at our church, but he would ask questions all the time about, where his dad was now and why did his dad have to die, and is he going to be alone? And, and it was nice to have such honest and beautiful people around him to answer these questions, because not one person that I ever saw said, oh, don't worry about that. You're too young. You don't have to worry about this. Like, everybody was very respectful to him and gave him honest answers. And this kid, I swear this boy was more mature than 90% of the people I know. So anyway, it's a little anecdote. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you got a little something out of this. And obviously, I hope you never have to talk to your child about death, but you probably will at some point or another, because we're all going to die, right? Well, anyway, thank you again for tuning in. I hope you got something out of this show. Please feel free to reach out if you have more questions, if you have topics you'd like me to discuss. And thanks for tuning in. Have a great week. And remember, whatever you're feeling is normal. Your feelings are valid. Grief is okay. And so are you.
Good Grief was brought to you by me. You can find me online at nikkithedeathdoula.com. Today's episode was produced by me. Research and scripts written by me. Your host is me. Editing and sound design also me. Music is not me. Music is Cheery Monday by Kevin MacLeod. License information can be found at filmmusic.io/standard-license. Special thank you to my best friend and husband for constantly reassuring me that I don't suck.